Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Kiwi Ears Fortezza. So Fortezza sort of differentiates itself from other sets because it has two dynamic drivers, and you can see them right there. So pretty cool. It's like two dynamic drivers stuck together. And there is one balanced armature, which we can kind of see right there. So 2DD, 1BA, kind of an interesting configuration. I think the shell is very nice. I think Kiwi Ears does the build always very nicely. So let's kind of jump into it. This one is kind of a unique set. I wouldn't call it a general purpose set. I would call this one a preference or pretty much a low volume tuning set. It has a really big V-shaped graph on paper, but it really only works at low volume. And the point at which the bass would be fun, it sounds a little bit too bright. So we'll kind of look at it here, and if you look at other graphs, mine is tilted up a little bit, and it literally sounds like that in your ear. So I'm not going to say ignore my graph, but yeah. So you get a really big bass shelf, but this is pretty way off into the no-fly zone of treble levels. It's really, really up there, and it really only makes sense at quite low volume. And at low volume, you don't get this kind of bass shelf. You're kind of getting a bass shelf that kind of matches and balances at only low volume. This is way too bright. It simply dominates anything that's going on here. So if you think it's a bass head style set, it's not. It's almost the opposite of it because this is so bright. It's the opposite of the bass head tilt where they tilted it bright as opposed to turning it up and hearing a lot of bass. The more you turn it up, the less bass you're actually going to hear. So kind of interesting one. It's definitely pitched towards a certain style listener, someone who likes to listen at very low volumes. And even at low volume, it does sound like a sharp, intense balanced armature. On Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, you sort of notice it, and you really need to keep turning it down to the point where it sounds in balance. So if you just randomly throw this on your desktop amp or your phone and it was turned up to a volume for your previous set, it's probably going to sound way too bright. This one will force you to turn it down, and there's not that many sets that really do it, but typically sets tend to, you turn them up to get them in balance, to get the mids to come a little bit forward. This is the opposite. There's so much brightness and so much treble that you have to lower that treble volume down to where it matches the mids. So Peter Gabriel Sledgehammer was one. I think that's where I started, and you notice it kind of right away. It's like, that's really, really bright. And as you're turning it down, you hear the balance and the bass and the mids and the treble kind of fall in line. But the volume level of that, where that happens, is actually quite low. So, as I said, literally turn it down until the bass and the treble are about the same level, and those fall back towards the vocals. And again, typically you raise the volume, and this one is the opposite. You're going to be turning it down. It's the opposite. Bring the treble down, as I was talking about. So the sound, a low volume V, and on paper, like we just said, it's a big looking V on paper, but really not much of a V at low volume. It sounds much flatter because of the volume is so low. The bass, again, there's just a huge bass shelf that's easily dominated by the treble. When you consider the listening volume, the huge bass shelf is really not a whole lot. It's not all that impactful at low volume. It's the opposite of the bass head tilt. It's the more you turn it up, the less bass you're going to hear. So turn it down until you actually hear the bass is what I would say. The mids, somewhere between a V recessed mids and, there's just a lot of treble, so it tends to dominate, and the mids kind of fall back, so you have to turn it down. The BA does lend some clarity and sharpness to the mids, but it's just really hard to hear the rest of the BA capabilities at such a low volume. The upper mid rises really quickly, and it really thins out the sound, so you do need to keep the volume quite low. Otherwise, it sounds very thin. Even when you think you want to raise it, don't raise it because it's just going to thin out, especially the vocals. Treble, just an intense amount of treble that sounds okay at low volume. Again, even for a 1BA, it sounds sharp and detailed at low volume, but it's just going to thin out if you try to turn it up. So stage, again, another part that sounds better at low volume. It sounds bigger as it will flatten when it gets to higher volume. So again, as that upper mid rise is really kind of steep. And that tends to dominate and flatten out, and things thin out. That doesn't do anything good for the stage. So it really needs to sound more balanced for the stage to come out, and the tuning itself kind of works against that. So yeah, again, it's just a little bit too much to have a really nice stage. But as you bring these down in volume, it tends to work a little bit better. But too much treble will definitely flatten out and thin out, and you'll kind of lose the stage effect that you would get at lower volume. So that is what I got on Forteza. So thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.